This channel is all about the artist's journey, sharing process, tips, animations, and just having fun with the creative chaos. I have made a full webcomic series called Bring Me Love of over 300 pages, and now I'm working on a new web series called Silly Little Witchcraft, which you can read on Patreon or Webtoon Canvas. But today we're going to be talking about writing comics 101. We're going to talk about structure, flow, and staying sane, which is harder than you think. The first and most important step is to ask yourself, are you the kind of person who loves planning, who thrives on figuring out your story even before you get to drawing it? Or are you the type of person who feels much more comfortable jumping into a project with no plan and just trusting that things will work? Let's just talk about really quickly what makes up a typical story structure. And this is like the most basic thing that I think it's important that you understand before even thinking about how you're going to tackle a comic. So if you have ever taken a course on writing, or if you've ever read a little bit about what makes up a story, you might know this, but it's always good to brush up on the basics. First, we have the introduction to your story, the exposition. So this sets the scene. It introduces your characters, it introduces your world, and it gives the readers the background they need to know what the status quo is in the beginning of your story and to understand where they are and who they're with. Then you have the rising action, and this is the conflict that starts to build your story. This is the moment something shifts in the status quo. This is where tension and obstacles begin to pile up, or when your character faces a problem that needs solving. Then we go to the climax, and this is the big turning point. This is where your character faces the conflict head on. This is the most intense and important part of your story. And if you were to look at the structure of a story, it does look like a wave that goes up. But then we have the falling action, and this is when your wave starts to go down. This is when things start to settle. The consequences of that big moment that we just had start to play out, and the intensity kind of starts to decrease here, but it's still important that you pay really close attention to your falling action so that when you arrive to the final part of your story, the resolution, everything wraps up, or it doesn't, depending on your story. And this is where loose ends are tied up when the story finds its ending. Hey guys, this is editing Ariane from the future. I just wanted to let you know that while I'm exploring the basic structure of a story in this video, there are plenty of other story structures that you could use for your writing process. Because of that, I am making a complimentary blog post on my website so that we can explore all the other structures that you could dip your toes in before even writing your comic, or maybe that would suit your idea better. Just wanted to put that out there as we continue on with this video. And there are different ways to approach figuring out a comic story. Lucky for you, I'm going to break all of these down, and I'm going to share the pros and the cons of each one of these approaches so that hopefully that'll help you figure out what would work best for you. Let's talk about the structured approach first. This is for those of you who love a good plan. When you go structured, you're laying down a roadmap from start to finish. And that means you'll have a clear sense of direction every time you sit down to work. And this might sound really attractive to a lot of you. Personally, when I do a structured approach to comics, I like to start laying out each act or major beat first. And the structure of a story that I just laid out for you is a really good starting point for that, because I can know when my story starts, what's the incident that brings things into motion, what is the climax, what is the falling action, and what is the conclusion or the end, the resolution of my story. Then I fill in what happens in between those acts or those beats or those most important moments of my story structure. As a rule, I like to divide each one of my comic book episodes or updates into scenes. And for me, a scene changes whenever the location shifts, whenever a new character is introduced, whenever a conversation takes a big turn or ends, or when something external pushes the story into a new direction, new moment. And that's how I would go about dividing each one of my updates or episodes once I have my entire script structured. So it's kind of like slicing a pie into episodes once everything's written out. And now I want to talk to you about the pros and the cons of doing this approach to writing comics. So the pros is that you know what's coming next, you know where the story ends. It's easier to stay confident and consistent because you already did all that hard work of writing and you already know exactly what's happening. So you only have to focus on sitting down and drawing the comic. You don't have to worry about writing. The cons are that you might lose some of the excitement before you even start drawing, because writing is not easy and it takes a lot of mental effort and energy, and it can be really easy to lose momentum. Then, once you've already written everything, if when you're drawing, inspiration strikes later, it can be really hard to change the structure of your story or to make modifications once everything is so tightly laid out. The other thing that I find with the structured plan or approach is that as readers react to your story and give you feedback and your story evolves, you might feel boxed in by your early plan. And again, it just might be a little bit harder to go back and rework some things once everything is done. At least for me personally, it is hard. Now, another approach to working on writing your comic is a fluid approach. And yes, just like that sounds, this one is more spontaneous, and it is a method that I sometimes use as well. Instead of plotting everything up front, you write and draw as you go. And you don't necessarily have to know exactly how your story is going to end, but there are some things that you should know if you're going to try this approach. So you want to know what the story means to you. What is the intention behind the story that you're telling? You want to know what the overall tone of your story is going to be. You want to know what drives your characters. You can approach this in different ways. So maybe you build each episode around a cliffhanger and you work in small portions of writing like that. Maybe you work on each episode through emotional arcs or character arcs. Or you maybe even treat each episode as a little standalone moment. This works really well with slice of life comics or with comedy, so that is something that can work really well with a fluid approach. Maybe you're a really visual person, and so you start by thumbnailing visuals and then sketching out the moments that come to mind. And after that is when you start writing the dialogue that goes into those thumbnails, or even just the narration that's going to go along with the visuals that you made. So just like the structured approach, there's pros and there's cons to this. So the pros are that you get to play, you get to experiment, and you get to let the art lead the writing and not the writing lead the art. It's great if you thrive on novelty and creativity, and you can start creating right away without having to wait for a perfect script or a finalized script. The cons are that your story can feel disconnected or chaotic to your readers. You might struggle to tie everything together later on if you want to finish the comic. Without a plan, it can be easy to lose momentum too, or you can feel anxious about figuring out what comes next if you don't have a plan for it. So it definitely can work, but it's for a certain type of personality, just like the structured plan. Now, finally, there's the hybrid method. And honestly, I found that for me, combining both approaches works the best. And this is how I go about the hybrid method. So I like to structure my story by acts, kind of like a play. First act, second act, and third act. And I know what the starting point of my story is. I know what the climactic point of my story is, and I know what the ending of my story is as well, more or less. It doesn't have to be like set in stone, but I have a basic idea. But in between each one of those moments, I let things flow. And so like I'll improvise as I draw, I'll experiment, I'll let each episode evolve naturally as I work on it. And I draw and I write at the same time while working on those. And so for me, that works really nicely because I have a bit of structure and a bit of play. And I find that it's the most reliable approach for me. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work for everyone. I just wanted to put it out there because it's the method that I've used, but I wanted to put it out there as an option as well. Now, regardless of what approach you choose to starting your very first comic project, if you're an absolute beginner, I have 2 tips for you that hopefully will help you in your journey. When you start comics for the first time, my recommendation is that you start with really short stories so that you get to experience what it is to solve a story. Like, and I mean solve as in like figure out what's gonna drive a story and finish it. For example, a really good exercise for beginners is to create a story that's only 10 pages long. And this is so hard to do. To be able to create a story and wrap a story in 10 pages is a great exercise for your writing skills and for your drawing skills, because you need to solve for a lot of things. You don't have a lot of panels and you don't have length to, develop too much, which can be really difficult. But limitations can be great for creativity and for practice. So what you want to do with this 10-page comic is you want to create your 2 first pages as your introduction. Then page 3 and 4 will be your rising action. Then 5 and 6 will be your climax. Then, 7 and 8 will be your falling action. And the last 2 pages will be your resolution. I guarantee you, if you try it, it's gonna be hard if you've never made comics, or even if you have made comics before, if you feel like you're in a bit of a rut, or if you really wanna get your creative juices flowing, it's a great exercise and I highly, highly recommend it. Now, the other tip that I have when it comes to developing comics is that you want to focus a little bit more on quantity versus quality. And not to say that quality isn't important, of course it is. But if you have never made a comic or you don't have a lot of practice with it, the more comics you make and fail at, the quicker you'll get to a point where you feel confident enough to tackle a big project or to finish a comic. And I have made so many comics in the past that have not been great. I've started comics and not finished them so many times. And it can be really frustrating and demoralizing, but I promise you, the more you practice, the more you fail, the closer you are to actually doing and finishing something. So those are 2 tips that I highly recommend when it comes to developing or writing your comics and tackling them. But essentially, that is how I think about structuring stories for my comics. And whether you're a planner or a dreamer or somewhere in between, I really hope that this was helpful. I hope that you figure out your own writing process and what works for you. And don't be afraid to tweak and try different things, different configurations. If this was helpful, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, all those things. Check out my comics on Webtoon Canvas or on my Patreon. And I hope that you have a lot of fun creating your comic. Let me know in the comments if you're gonna try the structured, the fluid approach, or the hybrid method. I'm really curious to know about that. And I'll see you for the next video. Bye.